Welcome to Spine Academy. In this video, we're going to review the structural components of the cervical spine. This is an excerpt from a broader course on cervical spine anatomy. If you're interested in seeing that course, we've left a link in the description. So in this next section, we're going to talk about the bony elements of the cervical spine. So that is the skeletal part of the neck. Now what we're looking at in this picture is really beautiful. You can see the cervical spine is what connects the skull to the chest. So that's the rib cage and the thoracic spine, which would be down here. You can see here as you roll through this, there's 7 blocks in the neck. This is looking at it from the front right there. That simple structure is what confers all the motion in your cervical spine or in your neck. Now, if you were to break it down and just look at the vertebral bodies themselves, this picture, as you roll through it, you can kind of see the top 2 blocks, C1 and C2, are a little bit different from all of the other vertebral bodies. C3 down looks very similar, and you can kind of see here's the back part of the neck, here's the front part of the neck. We're going to drill down on that a little bit better in a couple of slides. Now, when you look at the structural elements of the spine, just looking at it from the side, this picture right here, we want to show that here's the front of someone's face. You can see where the neck is. This is roughly to give you a sense of the proportion. Again, the C1 and C2 blocks look a little bit different. They act a little bit different. Most of your ability to turn your head really comes from this joint right there. So it's a very important kind of joint. Everything below that from C3 down looks very similar. So you can see 1, you can see 2, and then all the 3 to 7 below that. So if you were just to look at a single bone, like if we looked at this and we said, hey, we really want to just look at one single block, because you can get lost in that picture. Here you can see very nicely, here's the C5 vertebral body as we kind of roll through it. The C5 body I just kind of pulled out as a sample because it looks very similar to C3, C4, C7, etc. But if we were to take that one block out and look at it, this is what it would look like. So here we're looking at it from the top down. This is a picture looking at the front of the spine. This is the back of the spine here. This is looking at it from the side, so the front of the spine, the back of the spine over here. So what's neat about this is you can really kind of see a couple of very important structures, and we're getting in on that. But one thing to notice right here is that this hole right in the center of it is called the spinal canal. You stack all these blocks up, that's what makes the spinal canal, and that is where the spinal cord itself sits. So the important structures that we want to highlight when we're going through a single segment is we want to look at the components that make up that segment, because these are terms that you're going to hear as we talk about things in future chapters. So the most important structure to really talk about would be the vertebral body. That's the front part of the spine. This looks a little bit like a tuna can. It's cylindrical. So looking at it from the top, you can see it's kind of an oval. Looking at it from the side, you can see it's a rectangle. That's a solid piece of bone. When you stack them all up, that's what makes up the spinal column. Now, there are structures that hang off the back of that, and the next probably most important structure to really talk about is the pedicles, which are small structures that connect the front part of the spine with the back part of the spine. And these can be small, 3-4 millimeters even in size, but that's what connects you from a bony standpoint front to back. When you go to these structures in the back, you can kind of see here there's a couple of interesting structures. The lateral mass. Now, the lateral mass is a paired structure, right and left. It's the back part of the spine, and here you can kind of see it here. It looks like a parallelogram when you look at it from the side. That stack of blocks, one on the left, one on the right, really helps your ability to have constraint. It's easy to lean forward, lean back. It's a little more constrained in terms of turning and bending from side to side, and that is a byproduct of the shape of these lateral masses. And then really to close out the spinal canal in the back here, we're looking at a couple of very important structures. There's something called the lamina here. That's a term you'll hear when we talk about removing the lamina for a laminectomy. You've probably known somebody who has had a laminectomy in their lifetime. That is an important structure that forms the back part of the spinal canal, and something that we'll remove when we're doing a laminectomy to kind of open up the canal. And then lastly, there's this structure right here, which is the spinous process. And that's the structure that you can kind of feel when you feel the back part of your neck. That little knob that you're feeling, that's the spinous process. So that's a single vertebral body, right? That's looking at C5, just as a representative of what we're talking about. But now if you put them all together again, this animation shows very nicely how they stack together. So here's that spinous process we just talked about. Here's the lamina here. Here's the lateral mass here. As you come around here, you can see there's some portholes we'll get into later. And then here is the stack of vertebral bodies from the front. C1 and C2, again, look a little bit different. C3 down, these all kind of look the same. This is the subaxial spine once again. Now we'll talk a little bit more. That's the stack of blocks, but now what connects these blocks? There are a couple of important types of structures. between the C3 and C4 level, looking at it from the front, there's this kind of spongy structure called an intervertebral disc. And an intervertebral disc is a collagenous structure that has some flexibility. Think of it as a shock absorber or a cushion or something like that that's separating these blocks of bone. A block of bone is very rigid, it's structured, there's no pliability in that, but like the way you get your motion is as a byproduct of these structures. So the disc itself and the ligaments that we'll talk about in a little bit, those are the structures that have some pliability to them. They're kind of elastic structures. They're also wear items. These are the things that wear out over time, like tires in your car or gaskets or other things like that, because they tend to get used over the lifetime. So this is the disc between C3 and C4. It's called the C3-4 disc. Between 4 and 5, similarly, you have a structure called the C4-5 disc. That numbering nomenclature, when people get sometimes confused when you say, oh, C4-5, we're talking about one structure. It's between C4 and C5, and it's numbered C4-5. That's just one structure, even though there's two numbers in it. So if you think about a single disc looks like a radial tire. I tell people it's like a tire. It has a very dense kind of steel band on the outside of it that forms a very robust kind of set of layers that really give it its strength. And then the inside of this is like a jelly donut. So it's another analogy people often will hear is that your disc is like a jelly donut. There's jelly on the inside and donut on the outside. Now the donut part of this is pretty tough. It's actually designed to last you a lifetime. It's got a bunch of layers of very dense fibrous collagen that make that up. The inside of it is kind of pulpy, so it's a little bit juicier, it's kind of spongy, it's what gives it the sponginess. And that single structure, that jelly donut if you will, we call an intervertebral disc. Now, if the jelly itself herniates out, and you may have heard of somebody who's had a herniate, or you may have had yourself a herniated disc, that piece that herniates out can come out kind of any side here, but where you really feel it is when it kind of comes out towards here. You can see how the disc kind of projects in that direction, but it lends itself to herniations that are out in this direction. If you squeeze on that nerve that's running out the side there, you'll start feeling symptoms depending on where that nerve is. That's something we'll talk about later when we talk about pathology in the cervical spine. But recognizing the relationship between this structure and the structures around it. Here's the spinal cord. I mean, look how close it is. Like, it's very easy for a problem here to turn into a spinal cord problem, and that's something that we can talk about in greater detail in the future. So outside of the discs, which are hidden on this picture, but again, you all know this now as experts, that between C4 and C5, there's a disc back there. But strapping the whole spine, so you have the stack of blocks, you've got discs between them. Strapping all those blocks together are a set of ligaments that are really important because they're elastic, they're flexible, but they're really tough, and they're basically joined to each of these vertebral bodies like scotch tape that are kind of stuck along the perimeter of them that permit the bodies to move in all these different directions, but with constraints. In the setting of trauma, sometimes these will break, but they're designed to last you a lifetime. And so the ones that are really important, you can kind of see here the front of the spine, that's called the anterior longitudinal ligament. As we roll around the spine, you can see there's some importance. There's something called the ligamentum flavum here. You can kind of see it on both sides underneath the lamina. In the back, you can see the interspinous, supraspinous ligaments and the nuchal ligament, and then wrapping back around to the front, the anterior longitudinal ligament. Those are probably the most important ligaments to be aware of, and it's not really critical that you know the names of them. We don't necessarily, when we go do surgery, we often have to manipulate those or take those out. It's not critical, but it's important to recognize that these stacks of blocks, what make up the cervical spine, that stack of blocks is kind of strapped together by these ligaments that give it some flexibility, but also constrain its motion.
Thank you for watching this video. I hope you found it informative. If you've enjoyed it, please like and subscribe. If you have any questions, comments, or ideas for future content, we'd welcome them in the comment section below.